It's time for Political Buzz, the television forum to discuss politics and issues of interest for all of Western New York. Now, from the WBBZ television studio at the Eastern Hills Mall, this is Political Buzz.
Hello, everyone. John DeShula with you here on your hometown television station with our executive producer and owner of WBBZ-TV, Phil Arno. Just a quick programming note. In just a few months, we're going to launch a brand new local game show here on WBBZ-TV called Bragging Rights. Yours truly will host. Phil Arno will be picking up the mantle here on Political Buzz, and we'll look to make some changes and continue to grow with this show as we move forward. So, Phil, we look forward to that new development here at the station.
It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's all right. And don't mess with Phil. He's tough. He's a tough guy. Not really. We welcome back to the show Steve Pigeon, Democratic strategist, attorney for Underberg and Kessler. Steve, we haven't seen you in a while, so welcome back to the show.
Good seeing you. We're good to be back.
Former chair of Democratic Party here in Western New York in Erie County, and the former Republican chair for Erie County is Bob Davis, and Bob runs the partnership advertising firm, political analyst on local television and the media, and good to have you guys back on the show.
It's good to be here.
Let's start with Donald Trump. It was all the rage. You know, a couple of weeks ago, Trump was in town. The plane arrived. It was a media circus. And then on Friday, at an afternoon at 4:15, and our director found some tweets. There he is saying, you know, I've clearly stated that if the New York State Republican Party is able to unify, I would run for governor and win. They can't unify. Sad! Exclamation point. And that was followed by another tweet that basically said the top leadership of New York State Republican Party is totally dysfunctional. He's responding to Ed Cox there. We'll talk about that. They haven't won a major election in many years. And then the last tweet basically said, while I won't be running for governor of New York State, he's got looking forward to big things that are going to happen. So there they were, gentlemen, tweets that came out. Now you'd think, here's a man that maybe could pick up the phone and talk to the guys that met with him. I mean, Bob is carrying the Republican mantle here. What did you think of that?
Well, I was surprised the way he announced it. You know, I would have thought that it would have, you know, been calls to, like, you know, Nick Langworthy, the Republican chairman here in Erie County, who went down to New York a couple of times. Even Carl Palladino, who was there at least once that I'm aware of. But yeah, I was surprised the way it was handled versus an actual announcement that, you know, I've decided not to run because, you know, he really was. He you know, had these Republican leaders in a few times, and it looked like it was moving along, even though a lot of people said from the get-go that he's never going to make this run. Well,
Steve, you said that earlier.
Well, I said it from the first. First off, he's been doing this since 1988. He's always going to run. He always says he can win, but yet then he never gets out the starting gate. He is a brand. It was good for the Trump brand for him to be you know, associated, that people want him to run. That's great. I don't think he was ever serious about running. I was surprised that Carl believed that he was going to run. I thought that you know, Carl should know better than that. But you know, but I'm not surprised at all. I'm not surprised how he did it because he doesn't understand. You know, he's really not about trying to build a team or build a candidacy, which would be, if you are, you would at least call people back and give them the courtesy.
Well, Phil had a theory on that you know, he didn't want to call attention to it.
Well, yeah, this is a negative for him. When he backs out, that's a negative. And nothing with his personality wants to accent the negative.
Yeah, but you know the other thing, Phil, he
always backs out.
He never got in.
But
right.
you know what? He did encourage the
No
thought
question.
that he would get in.
He always does.
This whole thing comes under the head of wishful thinking.
He's teasing us that there's bigger things to come, which obviously means he'll put his name out for president, and you probably won't see him run for president either.
Cuomo is so entrenched, and as we all know, incumbents start out with a huge advantage that anyone who runs against him is going to have an extremely hard time.
You've got about 3.5 million more Democrats than Republicans in this state. That is a huge hurdle.
But you know what? Not many of them define themselves as liberal. You know, they're Democrats, but they're not liberal Democrats. There are some, but the vast majority of Democrats are moderate. They don't. They
all took after Bill Clinton.
Well, in upstate New York.
Well, in upstate New York, anything outside of the New York City area.
Yeah,
and granted,
there's a lot of people,
Phil.
I'll bring you there. There's a lot of people. So I think that's a little bit of a misstatement. I would say that they're center to left, the average Democrat in New York State. You will find more conservative Democrats in our area and in upstate New York. But New York is the bluest of blue states.
Right.
It is going to be very difficult, and Rob Astorino needs to play to the right for his own party, but yet to appeal to average New Yorkers, he has to come to the middle. So and he's not very well known and isn't going to have a lot of resources, and he still has to explain. He can criticize Cuomo, but yet Cuomo's cut more taxes than he has. He's the county executive of the highest tax county in the United States of America, and he hasn't been able to make much of a difference as Westchester County Chairman. But the interesting thing also about Trump is I do think he made a good point about the dysfunctional state leadership of the Republican Party. Ed Cox is not a deep thinker, to put it nicely. Ed Cox is not much of a strategist. Ed Cox is, I think, is probably one of the weakest political leaders I've ever seen in New York State. So I think Trump made some good points about the awful leadership in the Republican Party in New York State, the non-existent leadership.
Well, and if that's the case, and Carl talked about that a few weeks ago, Bob, then who would and who should then run, or do you disagree and think Ed Cox is the guy that should be in place?
I think, to Donald Trump's credit, he highlighted some of the concerns that he has with the leadership of the state Republican Party, and he's not alone. He's not alone. I mean, I was very involved in the state Republican Party. I was first vice chairman of the state committee under Sandy Treadwell.
Nearly state chairman, and you would have been a great state chairman.
Thank you, Steve.
Well,
I think I'm sort of glad I didn't do that. But there's still time. No.
Well, what about the effort that Carl Palladino announced on Fox News, where he's now going to pick up the flag and try to draft Trump?
I don't know why Carl's drinking the Trump Kool-Aid. I just and I've talked with him privately at dinner about it. He loves Donald Trump, loves what he stands for, but what he's missing is this guy's a showman. He's a carnival barker. He's not a serious political leader or a political force. He doesn't even have a clue about New York State government. What he was telling people privately was he was going to, I'll cut taxes in half and I'll frack, as if that would be the only issue that he would have to talk about. So he really isn't a person who can be taken seriously as a elected leader. He is a carnival sideshow. I appreciate his entrepreneurial spirit, his business success for sure. That he growing on what his father had done and creating a real estate business in New York. But as far as a political leader, I think he's more of a Barnum and Bailey.
And I think that's a little bit of Ed Cox too. You got to remember when Ed Cox became the state Republican chairman, he really had very little involvement in organized politics, campaigns. So all of a sudden he is the head of the Republican Party in New York State, and came from nowhere. He wasn't a county chairman, wasn't a town chairman, wasn't.
I find that hard to fathom. Well, Phil, you want to jump in?
Addressing that, it's kind of a compounded problem, because not only is it a very blue state, but we're talking about disjointed leadership. You would think in a state like New York, you would have to have the cream of the crop, leading and planning if you're going to make any headway against the Democratic machine in the state. It's just the opposite.
We had that when George Pataki was the governor. Obviously, a Republican governor. The Republican infrastructure of the party was a lot stronger. Bill Powers was an aggressive chairman. Then Sandy Treadwell, who was the Secretary of State under George Pataki, assumed the state chairmanship. And I thought Sandy did a great job. I mean, he reached out to the African American community, something the Republican Party does not do well at doing, and hasn't since Sandy. He reached out to labor, which again is the Democrats have a strong foothold in that, but Sandy reached out. You don't see any of that outreach. We had a voter registration drive that worked under Treadwell.
What happened? I mean, if we had
Pataki didn't run again.
But the rest of the organization was in place. Wouldn't there have been a way to capitalize on that success and maintain it?
You would think so. You would think so, but it just didn't happen. When George left office, the Republican Party just there was nobody driving it. And you got to raise a lot of money, and that wasn't happening.
Let's also put it. But one thing that Cuomo's been very successful at is he has been a tax cutter. He has been talking about issues that a lot of Republicans care about. he has been in this part of the state spending a lot of time on jobs and economic development and paying attention to the area. And he has really brought a lot of Republicans to say, wow, this guy's done a pretty good job. So you have more of a challenge when you have a governor who is a person who's governing from the middle and being reasonable. And I think you could see that in the difference between Mayor de Blasio and Governor Cuomo. He's almost doing a triangulation between the hard right of the current Republican Party and de Blasio's hard left, where he's the reasonable Democrat. A lot of Republicans are supporting him because of the economic development, because of the jobs, because of the job he's done as the governor. So it's very difficult to be a strong chairman when you have a strong governor of the opposite party. But Ed Cox is not a person, as you say, doesn't understand organization, doesn't understand party structure, doesn't understand strategy, and is a lightweight. He's a lightweight. And I know he married Richard Nixon's daughter, who Richard Nixon clearly wasn't a lightweight when it came to political strategy, but that's really his claim to fame, right. And that's not enough to get to run a party.
Well, speaking of Governor Cuomo, when we come back on Political Buzz, we're going to head out to Albany on the phone with an individual who says New Yorkers need to fight for fiscal fairness. We'll have that and more when we come back. Talking about the race for governor here on Political Buzz, and if you've noticed, there's a television campaign, New Yorkers for Fiscal Fairness. I saw some television spots I thought was interesting, did a little digging, and found that Ron Deutsch is the executive director of the organization. He's joining us on our phone from Albany. Ron, explain this position here, because you're saying that Governor Cuomo and the state legislature need to do some things to create more of a middle class for the state of New York.
Yeah, I guess so. What we're particularly concerned about is that the governor is proposing a number of tax cuts that we think very much favor the wealthiest New Yorkers, literally millionaires, billionaires, and Wall Street banks. He's proposing, large cuts to the estate tax and also eliminating the dedicated bank tax in New York. So felt that given the fact that, New York State is facing record child poverty rates, record hunger, record homelessness, that right now is not the right time to be cutting taxes for the wealthy here in New York State.
Ron, what's been the response to your campaign?
I think the response has been positive. I mean, I've been traveling around the state, from Buffalo to Brooklyn, Plattsburgh to Poughkeepsie, and, we're hearing it from everybody right now. I think there's not a person that I've met that actually thinks that their school is doing better now than when Governor Cuomo took office. I think everybody's feeling the pain of the school cuts that are occurring at the local level. Certainly we've laid off tens of thousands of teachers across this state. We've eliminated programs. We've increased class size. So people are realizing that these cuts are real, and they're going to be continuing under the governor's budget. In order for the governor to provide these tax breaks to wealthy individuals across the state, he's still going to have to maintain a very low level of spending in New York, and in fact, going to have to cut, according to his own budget documents, another about $8 billion over the next 3 years from state programs and services. So we don't think that right now, when the number of millionaires in New York State is growing, it's not shrinking, that now is the time to start cutting taxes for the very wealthy among us. So we think that's a misguided approach, and felt like we needed to respond to the governor's assertions because no one was challenging it.
We just have a few minutes left on the line with you, Ron, before we change our subjects. I want to bring Steve and Bob into this discussion because the unions are involved with this campaign. How effective do you think a grassroots political action campaign like this is? Is it going to be effective at all?
It's effective, and I think Ron's just proving my point of what I just said to you about Governor Cuomo governing from the center. I totally agree on a national level, and I think the governor would too, that on a national level with the whole country, that it is not time to be giving tax breaks to the wealthiest, and we need to spend more on the middle class, and we need to invest in education, invest in infrastructure, invest in scientific research, invest in putting those things together that makes a national economy grow. But the problem that the governor's dealing with is that people can move. And the reason he's doing the estate tax and not doing the millionaire's tax is because we've been losing people in New York to the south, to Florida. People go to die in other places. So he has, and he also has had he inherited a $10 billion deficit. And we have been one of the highest spending states in the country, and our spending has been out of whack. So he shares all the goals that Ron shares, but you have to get New York's fiscal house in order as well. That's what we're seeing here.
Ron, why don't you respond to that?
So I would suggest, number one, the governor has gone so far as to call this the estate tax cuts the move to die tax. And the reality is the governor's own tax commission reviewed the supposed migration that's occurring, and it's not occurring. People are not moving to die. And in fact, the number of millionaires in New York State is growing faster than the national average, and their net income is growing exponentially here in New York.
That's because we've revived our economy in the state.
Well, this notion that somehow we have to continue to give tax cuts to millionaires and billionaires, I think, is just ridiculous. So it's not that people are leaving the state. If people are leaving the state, it's middle-class families who can't afford their property taxes. And instead of, gimmicky ideas like the freeze, what we need to be doing is providing a circuit breaker approach where we link your property taxes to your income level. So you never pay more than a certain amount of your income in property taxes, and then you get a credit against your income taxes if you pay too much.
All right, Ron, Bob Davis is going to weigh in.
Target tax relief.
I know a lot of people that have been very successful in the private sector that are now residents of Florida that used to live in Clarence and Amherst and Hamburg and Orchard Park. And they left the state for one reason. No taxes in Florida. So,
many of their businesses leave. Their philanthropy leaves.
And the jobs
they created leave. And clearly people have left New York State. I don't know how we could argue that, say they haven't.
Phil Arno's going to jump in, and then we're going to move on.
Well, Ron, one thing that you have to consider is if you raise the price on anything, you're going to discourage whatever that is in being purchased or used or whatever. If you raise the price on being wealthy or being a millionaire in the area or investing in New York State, if you charge more for that, then people will do it less. It's just that is human nature, and you can't argue against that. You have to be careful that you don't make it unattractive for people in New York State to invest and to create businesses. Otherwise, if you drive those people away, or even if they stay here and you dissuade them from starting a business or investing in a business, then you're going to be, in the long run, you're going to be a loser.
Ron, your opinion on that?
I would suggest that our economic development and tax policy is completely backwards. Right now, we spend about $7 billion a year on tax credits, tax abatement, economic development programs, and they all go to about the top 1% of businesses in the state. So what I would suggest is we should be taking that money and funneling it into developing and helping small business that are already in this state to grow. And that's an approach that we can take. And we can also use that money to help provide for a skilled workforce, which is something that businesses want. They also want a good infrastructure to get their goods and services to market. So there's a lot we can do to help grow business without giving away the store with things like Startup New York or all these designated tax-free zones that literally pit new businesses or existing businesses against new businesses that can come in and compete with them and put them out of business. So we need to level the playing field, and our tax policy, quite frankly, has been backwards for a long time, and we need to stop with the smokestack chasing that we're engaged in right now and start focusing on growing small business at the local level, because the money stays locally, and that's what generates economic activity.
Ron, thanks for taking some time and joining us today on the phone from Albany, and we'll check in with you soon, all right? The Executive Director of New Yorkers for Fiscal Fairness. Thank you, Ron.
Thanks, Ron.
Thank you.
Been a pleasure.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
All right. Steve, you were kind of shaking your head there a little bit toward the end.
I was just going to say that we've tried that way in New York for too long, and we ended up with the highest tax state, the highest regulated state, people leaving the state. Certainly, we even take education. He talked about education. The problem in our education in this state isn't the amount of money we spend. We spend more than most states. We spend, in the city of Buffalo, $23,000 per student. So the problem isn't money. The problem has been the administration. The problem has been a lot of other things. So I think that is what I was saying to you. There's many New Yorkers, though, that believe in what Ron's doing. And So what you see is that, you know, I would just say he represents the far left. You see he's very highly critical of the governor. That's why the governor has been getting a lot of Republican support, but also a lot of moderate Democrats, conservative Democrats, thinking Democrats. He has the right formula for bringing the nation back when everybody's being governed that way. But when you're competing with other states and people have the ability to move, it would be wrong for New York.
Let's pick up a little bit. Bob, you had a comment?
No, I agree with what Steve said.
Let's pick up a little bit on some news that we've seen in the headlines, which involve you and the Progressive Caucus. And the concern that the money for political candidates was spent not in. Explain what is going on. Well,
first off, I have no legal responsibility for that. So it's just but I was involved in it, and I know that everything was done correctly, that every dollar has been accounted for, that there was one mistake that was made that was caught, and amendments were put in. But what this is you have a political hack over in the Board of Elections, Dennis Ward, along with his Republican counterpart, Ralph Moore. People really should look at them. Part-time jobs, $105,000 a year, run their law practices out of the office. Ralph Moore, I don't know how many town attorneys he is of, but he must be bringing in close to a couple $100,000 a year, taxpayers' money. Dennis Ward's wife in a state patronage job. They have their employees insisting with their private business. Even I know, Ralph Moore used to even have employees do a lot of personal favors for him that many of the employees have told me about, like babysitting, some children that he had with employees there. But this group has been obsessed with me, and what they continually do is it's just total abuse of power and selective enforcement, that no matter what I do, they put a magnifying glass on. Meanwhile, there's people that aren't even filing records, let alone maybe making a mistake, like Christy Mazurek, the treasurer, didn't realize that some money had been sent to a vendor and she corrected it. There's people that don't even file, that this board doesn't go after because they're too busy playing their own politics. You have Ward now wanting to be a judge. He wants a cross endorsement when he's been a guy that, this is the same Dennis Ward when he didn't agree with a referendum that the county legislature voted. He threw the thing away and tried not to put it on the ballot and was caught. And even the Buffalo News is editorialized. I don't normally agree with a lot of their editorials, but they've even editorialized he shouldn't be the commissioner anymore. Now he wants a cross endorsement as a judge, and he's out campaigning as a judge when he's the highest election lawyer. He's supposed to be saying fair elections. He shouldn't be acting like a candidate, and he is. But this guy's a hack. He's obsessed. He's obsessed with electing his wife. He's now obsessed with getting this cross endorsement as a judge, and he uses this much like he's Don Quixote chasing a windmill, that no matter what, he's trying to say, oh, this guy did this wrong, this guy did that wrong. Nothing's ever come of it because I followed the election law, and I haven't broken the election law. And in this case, I'm not even responsible. I have no legal fiduciary duty. I was a donor to this committee. But he went and looked at the committee because of that. So it's really about time that, number one, I think we ought to think about whether in today's modern age we even need election commissioners. We ought to probably have a citizens commission panel, because to spend $105,000 on these guys with their political vendettas is a waste of money. And what you'll see happen with this is what's happened with all of them. Absolutely nothing.
You heard it here, right from Steve Pigeon. We'll be back with Political Buzz right after this. Welcome back to Political Buzz. Phil, you wanted to respond to what we just heard with Steve in the last segment.
Well, as always at WBBZ, when we talk about people, we welcome, there's an open invitation for people to respond, to come on the shows and respond and give their sides of it. And that makes for good TV, it makes for good discourse, and that's what we try to do, is inform the viewers on both sides. So there's an open invitation for anybody out there who wants to defend their position. When we talk about it, you're more than welcome to come on board.
That was pretty powerful stuff. Bob, as we end the show, we'll end on an up note. We mentioned that in the recent St. Patrick's Day parade, so political, some of these.
Well, very much so.
Events.
I mean, it's the unofficial start to the political season, and it always has been in Buffalo and Erie County, Western New York. The Irish Center on Friday afternoon of the parade weekend, They start at 11:30 in the morning. They serve us all corned beef and cabbage
How
and
late
carrots.
does it goes pretty late, too.
I've never been able to stay up that late, Steve. But, yeah, I mean, whether you're running for governor or state controller or county executive or mayor of Buffalo, every politician, Republican and Democrat, starts Friday afternoon at the Irish Center in South Buffalo, and it continues all day. It continues all weekend. They got the First Ward Parade on Saturday, the Delaware Avenue Parade on Sunday. It is the official start to the political season.
And we'll end our show with some video of the St. Patrick's Day Parade. Steve, we didn't see you there. It was a little chilly.
I missed the parade, but I was at the mayor's reception and was at the Irish Center.
There you go.
All right. Well, as we wrap up this edition of Political Buzz, our WBBZ cameras were happy to be there, and it was certainly a great event in downtown Buffalo as Buffalo experiences a renaissance. Thanks for joining us on Political Buzz Thursday morning at 9 a.m., Sunday morning at 11 a.m. on your hometown television station.